Put your hands up right now or I'll take you down. That was the first sentence Darius heard as he reached for the door handle of his own car. No greeting, no explanation, no warning. Just an order delivered with the kind of force that made his stomach tighten and his hands freeze in midair. His phone was still in his hand, still connected to his wife, still carrying her voice as she instantly shifted from casual conversation to raw fear. Before diving into this story, tell me where you're watching from. And if stories like this matter to you, hit subscribe and give me a like. It helps these real cases reach the people who need to hear them. The moment the officer shouted at him, Darius knew the situation had already crossed a line. He had not been driving. He had not been speeding. He had not been accused of anything. He had simply walked toward his car after leaving federal court, talking with his wife about their kids' dinner. Yet one command from a rookie officer turned a normal moment into the same nightmare he had seen destroy his father's dignity when he was 10 years old. Earlier that afternoon, Darius had stood in a courtroom arguing for a family that had been pushed aside because a landlord didn't want renters with a Latino surname. He fought the case, won the ruling, and walked out of the courthouse with the quiet satisfaction of someone who believed in the Constitution with every fiber of his being. But constitutional victories meant nothing now. The badge in his wallet meant nothing now. His suit, his degree, his position at the Department of Justice. None of it mattered. What mattered was the tone in the officer's voice and the assumption hidden inside it. Officer Michael O'Connor had been reprimanded that morning for making too many stops without proper justification. He had been told to slow down, to think, to follow policy. But he was operating on instinct, not policy. He had a history of reacting quickly, sometimes too quickly. Shaped by years of military service and unresolved trauma he never admitted to anyone. He believed quick action kept him safe. He believed hesitation was a threat, and when he saw Darius near a Lexus in an affluent neighborhood, he let instinct take over. Aisha heard everything through the phone. Her voice rose immediately. "Darius, what's happening? Who's yelling at you?" He answered calmly. "It's a police officer. Stay on the line." O'Connor repeated his command. "Hands up, don't move." Darius complied, raising both hands. Phone still active, video still streaming his face. He spoke evenly. "Officer, I'm not resisting. What's the issue?" O'Connor didn't answer that. Instead, he went straight to the next demand. "ID. I want your ID now." That was the moment Darius felt the old memory tighten around him. The memory of his father being searched in front of him for no reason other than existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. He answered the same way he teaches young lawyers to answer. Calm, controlled, precise. "I'm walking to my vehicle. I haven't committed a crime. What's your reasonable suspicion?" O'Connor didn't give one. He stepped closer. "I asked for your ID." Aisha's voice grew sharper. "Darius, please don't argue. I'm scared. Just keep talking to me." He lowered his tone for her. "I'm okay." Then he raised it again for the officer. "Officer, I'm a federal attorney. I'm leaving court. My car is registered to me." "This is unnecessary." O'Connor didn't back down. Inside his mind, the reprimand from earlier fed his defensiveness. He interpreted every calm response as resistance. He believed he was losing control of the situation. He believed raising his tone was the only way to regain it. "Show me your ID or I'll detain you for obstruction." That was the moment Darius understood exactly where the encounter was heading. He had represented too many clients in these situations. He had seen too many body cam recordings begin with the same pattern. Unexplained stop, escalating commands, accusation of obstruction, cuffs, humiliation, and later justification that never held up in court. He tried again. "Officer, I am not refusing. I am asking for probable cause." O'Connor ignored him. He moved closer. Too close. Aisha began to cry. "Darius, please." I can hear his tone. Please, just be careful." He kept his face calm. But inside, he felt the same tension he had felt as a child watching his father try to remain dignified under the weight of another man's authority. He had spent his entire adult life fighting to prevent others from living through the same moment, and now he was living it again. The officer tried a different angle. "Is that your car?" "Yes." "Then show me proof." "You can run the plates," Darius said. "They're registered to my full name." O'Connor radioed in the plate number. When he heard the match, D. Washington. He made an assumption that pushed things further. "Name's similar. Doesn't mean it's yours." Darius inhaled slowly. "Officer, this is profiling." O'Connor stiffened. He didn't like the accusation. He didn't like being challenged by someone who sounded educated, confident, and unafraid. Pressure mixed with defensiveness. "Don't lecture me," he said. "I'm telling you what to do." Darius saw where this was going. He had seen it hundreds of times across transcripts, depositions, and lawsuits. The officer no longer cared about facts. He cared about control. The legal violation was already forming. He kept his hands high. "I haven't refused anything. I asked a lawful question." O'Connor raised his voice. "Last chance, ID, or you're going in cuffs." That was the moment everything locked into place. The threat, the escalation, the pattern repeating itself exactly as the system allowed it to repeat. Aisha screamed through the phone. Darius steadied himself. He knew what came next. He also knew this moment would not end quietly. He braced emotionally the way he had seen his father brace decades earlier. The moment Officer O'Connor repeated his command for ID, the tone of the encounter shifted into something rigid and escalating. And both men sensed it at the same time. Darius stood still, hands raised, phone still connected to his wife, while O'Connor stepped closer with the certainty of someone who believed authority was its own justification. The officer's voice tightened. "ID, right now." Darius answered with the same calm he used in court. "For what purpose?" "I'm walking to my own car." O'Connor didn't consider the answer. He didn't consider context. He believed quick decisions protected him, and he believed Darius's questions were a challenge rather than a legal right. His tone sharpened again. "You heard me. Don't make me repeat myself." Aisha, still on the phone, pleaded with Darius. "Please just comply. I don't like his voice. Please." Darius kept his voice level. "I am complying. I am asking for reasonable suspicion. I have a right to know why I'm being stopped." O'Connor moved past the question entirely and began treating the situation as if suspicion already existed. He asked whether the car was owned by Darius. He asked why Darius was in the area. He asked where he was coming from. None of the questions were legally justified, and none were tied to any specific allegation. Darius answered what he could, not because he was required to, but because escalation was already visible. "I left federal court. I'm heading home. This vehicle is mine. The plate is registered to my name." O'Connor heard the answers but didn't internalize them. Instead, he ran the plates again, as if waiting for a different result. The computer confirmed the same information. D. Washington. The match didn't calm him. It frustrated him. His internal narrative didn't fit the facts, and that tension pushed him to raise his tone. "Step away from the vehicle. Keep your hands up." Darius stepped back, hands still visible. "Officer, I'm doing everything you're asking, but I still need to know what justified the stop." O'Connor snapped back. "You're obstructing." This could have been simple. That line, "This could have been simple," was one Darius had heard countless times in police reports he'd litigated. It was a phrase often used to shift blame onto the person being stopped rather than the officer escalating the situation. He recognized it instantly. He understood what it meant. The officer felt threatened not by danger, but by the loss of control. Meanwhile, Aisha continued shouting into the phone. "Please don't argue. Please stay calm. I can hear he's getting angry." Darius responded softly to her. I'm calm. I promise. Then he raised his voice again for the officer. State your probable cause. I'm entitled to that information. O'Connor made a choice. Instead of providing a reason, he reframed the entire interaction. You're acting suspicious. You're refusing a lawful order. You're obstructing. Darius considered his words carefully. I'm not refusing anything. I'm asking a question you're required to answer. O'Connor didn't want to hear it. His training had taught him to assert control first and justify later, and his personal history had taught him that hesitation could be fatal. That blend pushed him toward the next step. He announced that he was conducting an investigatory stop. He demanded ID again. This time he reached for Darius's wrist. Darius stepped back reflexively, and the officer interpreted the motion as resistance. Don't pull away from me, Darius answered quickly. I didn't pull away. I moved because you didn't state your intent. The officer raised his voice again. Turn around. Hands behind your back. The command struck Aisha immediately. She screamed through the phone. Darius! No! Please! Please don't let him! Darius interrupted gently. It's okay. I'm not resisting. Then he looked at the officer with measured clarity. You are detaining me without cause. O'Connor didn't respond with words. He grabbed Darius's wrist and pulled it backward. Darius didn't fight it. He allowed the motion, understanding that resistance, even perceived resistance, could be misinterpreted. He kept his voice steady. I am not resisting. I am complying under protest. As O'Connor pulled out the handcuffs, he made his justification clear. You're under arrest for obstruction. Darius answered immediately. There is no obstruction. I followed every order. You escalated without cause. The officer didn't pause. He cuffed the first wrist, then the second. The metal tightened. Aisha heard the clink through the phone and broke into sobs. Darius, I'm calling someone. I'm calling the DOJ. I'm calling 911. I'm calling everybody. Darius spoke calmly to her while the officer pushed him toward the hood of the car. I'm fine. Stay with me. Keep the line open. Then came the moment O'Connor crossed into clear constitutional violation territory. He reached into Darius's pocket without consent and pulled out his wallet. Darius voiced the violation instantly. You do not have consent to search my personal property. O'Connor didn't respond. He opened the wallet. The DOJ badge stared back at him. His posture froze. His breath caught. His expression shifted rapidly from authority to confusion to panic. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't prepared for this. His assumptions had collapsed under the weight of reality. Darius spoke clearly and firmly. Now you know exactly who I am? Aisha heard his tone change and asked, What happened? What's going on? He answered calmly, almost too calmly, as if he were narrating evidence for a courtroom record. He just found my federal credentials. O'Connor didn't speak for several seconds. His mind raced, his training, his fear, his instincts. Everything collided with the fact that he had just detained a DOJ civil rights attorney without cause. He tried to regain control. Why didn't you show me this earlier? Darius answered evenly. Because you are required to state the legal basis for a stop. You didn't. You escalated instead. At that moment, neighbors began stepping outside. Phones appeared, someone whispered. I think he just arrested a lawyer, someone else said. Record it. A bystander began live streaming without hesitation. The situation had shifted into public view, and the pressure on O'Connor intensified. He radioed for a supervisor. His voice shook slightly even though he tried to hide it. When Sergeant Lopez arrived, she recognized Darius immediately from previous CPD DOJ training sessions. Her expression tightened. She understood instantly that the officer had made a serious mistake. She walked toward them quickly. Counselor Washington. Are you all right? Darius answered calmly. Physically, yes. Legally, no. I was detained without reasonable suspicion. Lopez turned to her officer. "What was your basis for the stop?" O'Connor stumbled. He tried to reconstruct his reasoning. He failed. He said Darius was acting suspicious. He said the car didn't appear to match. He said he feared theft. Lopez cut him off. "That is not probable cause." More neighbors recorded. The live stream spread quickly online. Comments began appearing. People began sharing the video. The tension around the officer grew heavier. Lopez ordered him to remove the cuffs. He complied, still shaking. Darius rotated his wrists slowly and spoke with cold precision. "For the record, this was a Fourth Amendment violation. You detained me unlawfully. You searched me unlawfully. And you escalated without cause." O'Connor had no answer. He said nothing. And just like that, the stop ended. But the consequences had only begun. The moment O'Connor tightened the cuffs on Darius's wrists, everything shifted into a new level of seriousness, and everyone present knew it. Darius felt the pressure cut into his skin, the same painful reminder he had seen on his father's wrists decades earlier. Aisha heard the metal snap through the phone and reacted instantly. Her voice rose in panic. "Darius, what was that? Tell me what that sound was." He answered as calmly as he could. "He's putting me in cuffs." Her reaction was immediate and raw. "Why? You didn't do anything. Why?" He spoke evenly to keep her from spiraling. "I know. Stay on the line. Don't hang up." Meanwhile, O'Connor declared loudly, "You're under arrest for obstruction." Darius answered with controlled clarity. "I did not obstruct. I complied with every order. You escalated without any legal basis." He spoke as though he were already giving sworn testimony. O'Connor didn't respond. He pushed Darius against the car, holding him in place more forcefully than necessary. The phone slipped from Darius's hand and hit the ground, landing face up. Aisha could still see the lower angle and could still hear every movement. She called out his name over and over, her panic building, when he didn't immediately answer. She made two decisions at once. She called 911 on her second phone, and she called one of his colleagues from the DOJ Civil Rights Division. She said the same sentence to both. "My husband is being detained by a Chicago officer right now. He needs help." She didn't know what help would look like, but she knew she had to act fast. While Darius's phone lay on the pavement, several white neighbors from the surrounding homes stepped outside. Some had been watching through windows when they saw the officer handcuff a man in a business suit for no apparent reason. The confusion pulled them out of their houses. A few held up phones automatically. One said quietly, "This doesn't look right." Another began streaming directly to Twitter without hesitation. The incident had already begun to spread. Within minutes, the hashtag Lincoln Park Lawyer would appear on people's screens. O'Connor rummaged through Darius's wallet without consent. The moment he saw the DOJ credentials, his expression froze in place. The badge didn't fit the narrative he had built in his head. He had expected a suspect. He had expected an explanation that aligned with his suspicion. Instead, he saw federal authority staring back at him. Darius didn't let the pause linger. "You know who I am now. You know exactly what you've done," O'Connor stammered. "Why didn't you tell me?" Darius answered flatly. "I did. You ignored it. You were required to state a lawful basis for this stop. Instead, you escalated without cause when Sergeant Lopez arrived." She assessed the situation quickly. She recognized Darius, not just as a federal attorney, but as someone who had participated in police reform training sessions. She saw the cuffs. She saw the officer's stiff posture. She understood the legal implications instantly. She ordered O'Connor to remove the cuffs. He hesitated. "Sergeant, he..." She interrupted sharply. "Remove the cuffs, now." He obeyed reluctantly, his hands shaking because he knew the gravity of his mistake. Darius rolled his wrists and looked directly at Lopez. "Sergeant, I want it noted on record that I complied fully. I asked for probable cause. None was given. My property was searched without consent. Lopez nodded. I understand. We'll sort this out. But Darius knew the sorting process had already begun the moment the first neighbor started recording. Meanwhile, the live stream continued climbing. Comments poured in. People questioned the basis of the arrest. Others recognized Darius's name from past civil rights cases. The video circulated quickly, and within minutes, it reached thousands. A bystander approached Darius cautiously once the cuffs were removed. Are you all right? Do you need me to send you the video? Darius answered evenly. Yes, please. Email it to this address. He dictated it slowly. The bystander typed it in. Several others followed, offering their recordings. He accepted them all. A DOJ attorney named Marcus Hall called Aisha after receiving her frantic message. She spoke quickly, without breathing. He's been detained. He said the officer found his badge. I don't know what's happening, Marcus told her. I'm on my way. Keep the call open with him. When she picked up Darius's phone again, she heard his voice steady and controlled. I'm here. I'm fine. I'm talking to the sergeant. She exhaled shakily. She had been holding her breath without realizing it. O'Connor tried to explain himself to Lopez. He wouldn't give ID. He was acting suspicious. Lopez cut him off again. Walking to a car is not suspicious. Asking for probable cause is not obstruction. Searching a wallet without consent is not acceptable. Her frustration grew as she spoke. She knew this wasn't just an internal problem. This was a public incident. This was a federal employee. This was a mistake with consequences far beyond paperwork. Darius asked a pointed question. Sergeant, is he being relieved of duty pending investigation? O'Connor looked stunned. Lopez didn't hesitate. Yes, he is. She took his badge and weapon and instructed him to wait in the vehicle until IA arrived. O'Connor felt his world constrict. He had been convinced he was acting properly. Now he was realizing he was facing the largest professional crisis of his life. While Lopez tried to stabilize the scene, more neighbors approached. One said, People are already sharing this online. It's everywhere. Darius nodded slowly. Good. People should see it. He knew visibility mattered. He had fought too many cases where evidence disappeared or was contested. Here, the evidence was spreading in real time across the city. Minutes later, internal affairs officers arrived and began asking questions. Darius gave them a clear, methodical recounting of the sequence of events. At no point was I informed of the basis for the stop. At no point was I given reasonable suspicion. At every moment, I complied with verbal commands. At no point did I refuse identification. I asked for legal justification. The IA officer nodded and continued taking notes. They asked about consent to search. There was none. Darius said, He reached directly into my pocket. IA looked at O'Connor, who avoided eye contact, when the officers asked whether Darius wished to file a formal complaint. He answered with unmistakable firmness. Yes, immediately, a bystander whispered to another. He's a lawyer. This won't end well for the cop. They were right. As the IA team escorted O'Connor away for questioning, he looked back briefly at Darius. There was something in his expression that wasn't clear yet. Anger, fear, shame, confusion, a mixture of emotions he couldn't process. Darius didn't respond. He watched him leave without speaking. Sergeant Lopez apologized to Darius, though she knew apologies didn't fix constitutional violations. He acknowledged it with a nod but didn't soften his tone. This was unlawful from the beginning. This will be handled. And he meant it. The stop was over. The cuffs were off. But the consequences, legal, public, and personal, were only beginning to take shape. The moment Darius returned home that evening, the emotional weight of the incident finally settled into the household, and it hit harder than he expected. His wrists were visibly marked from the cuffs, and when Aisha opened the door, She didn't speak. She simply pulled him into her arms with a force that came from fear rather than relief. She kept asking the same question again and again, almost in disbelief. Why did he do that to you? Why? Darius didn't have an answer that would make sense to her or to himself. He said quietly, because he saw what he wanted to see. And then he sat down at the table while she examined his wrists with trembling hands. Their son Jamal wandered into the room halfway through the conversation. He saw the bruises and froze. "Daddy, why did the policeman take you?" he asked in a small voice that carried more truth than any legal argument Darius had made that day. The question pierced him deeply because he had asked the same thing when he was a child. He pulled Jamal close and said, "He was wrong. Buddy, that's all you need to know tonight." Jamal hid behind his mother's leg after hearing the answer. The fear in his eyes lingered, while the children tried to piece together what happened. The video of the incident continued spreading at an alarming pace. By the time Darius changed into a fresh shirt, the clip had already reached 2 million views, with hundreds of thousands of comments pouring in. Some defended him, some condemned the officer, and some turned the incident into a broader argument about policing, race, and power. A spontaneous gathering began forming at the edge of Lincoln Park. People held signs. They chanted his name. They demanded accountability. The footage of the officer cuffing him without stating a reason became the defining image of the night. Inside the Chicago Police Department, Internal Affairs reviewed O'Connor's record within hours. The numbers jumped off the screen. 58 traffic stops in 2 years, 45 of them involving Black or Latino drivers, with only 8 resulting in arrests. The pattern was striking. The IA captain stated plainly, "This is going to be a problem," and ordered a full review of both the officer's history and the body cam footage from the incident. The footage confirmed everything: the absence of reasonable suspicion, the escalation, the unauthorized search, the discovery of the DOJ badge, and the look of panic on the officer's face when he realized who he had detained. There was no ambiguity in the sequence. It spoke for itself. As the night moved on, Darius's phone buzzed non-stop with messages from colleagues, reporters, former clients, and community leaders. Some offered support, some asked for interviews, others warned him to be prepared for backlash. Darius ignored most of them. He wasn't ready to talk. He sat in the living room with his laptop open, watching the video again, not because he needed to, but because he needed to confront the reality of how quickly the situation had escalated. He listened to his own voice staying calm even as the officer's tone rose. He listened to Aisha screaming in fear. He listened to his own declaration of Fourth Amendment violation with the trained precision of someone who had seen too many cases end exactly like this. And he heard something else too. A tremor in his own voice he had not noticed in the moment. It unsettled him. Later that evening, he received a call from an old friend who worked as a trauma psychologist. She warned him that the experience could trigger a delayed stress response, especially given his childhood memories. His initial reaction was to insist he was fine, but her concern made him pause. She reminded him that even the strongest people can fracture under sudden fear. He agreed to schedule an appointment the next morning, on the other side of the city. Officer O'Connor sat alone at his apartment with a bottle of whiskey beside him. He replayed the body cam footage over and over, searching for moments he could defend. But each time he pressed play, the reality hit him harder. He had escalated without cause. He had allowed fear and bias to override judgment. He had searched a man illegally. He had cuffed a federal attorney in front of witnesses, and now his career was hanging by a thread. He stared at the wall for long stretches of time, seeing flashes from Afghanistan mixed with flashes from the stop. His mind refused to separate the two. In his reflection, he saw the face of a friend who died beside him overseas, a memory that returned only when he was under extreme pressure. The hallucination startled him. He drank more to silence it. Back at the Washington home, Aisha tried to settle the children for the night. Jamal insisted on sleeping in their room. Nia, their older daughter, wrote a short message on a piece of notebook paper and left it on her father's bedside table before going to bed. It said, "I'm proud of you. Daddy, please don't be sad." When Darius found it later, he sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, holding the note. His eyes closed. His breathing slowed. He felt both gratitude and grief in equal measure. By midnight, protests grew larger. Community organizers posted messages demanding immediate disciplinary action. Several local politicians released statements urging CPD to speed up the investigation. Journalists requested interviews. National commentators began discussing the incident on late-night segments. The city's leadership scrambled to prepare a response before morning. When Darius stepped onto his porch around 1 a.m. to catch a breath, he felt the impact of the moment landing squarely on his shoulders. He had spent years fighting systemic discrimination inside courtrooms, pushing for reforms, challenging policies, and arguing for fairness. But none of that changed the fact that a single officer, on a regular afternoon, still saw him as suspicious for simply existing in a neighborhood where people assumed he did not belong. It reinforced how much work was left to do, and it reminded him of the oath he had taken to protect the rights of others, even when his own were violated, before going to bed. He sat down one last time with Aisha. She looked exhausted, shaken, and angry. She asked him quietly, "What are we going to do next?" He answered with a certainty she could trust. "We're going to shine light on it. We're going to fight it. And we're going to make sure nobody forgets what he did." She nodded slowly. She wasn't ready for the battle ahead. But she knew he was. As he finally lay down, the video crossed another 1,000,000 views. The hashtag continued climbing. The city grew restless. The family barely slept. And as dawn approached, one thing became clear. This was no longer just an incident. It was the beginning of a case that would test the city, the department, the officer, and Darius himself in ways none of them were ready for. By September, the emotional shock of the incident had transformed into purpose, and Darius made the decision he knew he would eventually make. He filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the city of Chicago and Officer Michael O'Connor. He drafted the complaint with the same precision he used in every major case. But this time he was both the attorney and the plaintiff, and that dual role sharpened every word. He alleged unlawful detention, false arrest, violation of the 4th and 14th Amendments, emotional distress, and negligent supervision. He attached the body cam recording, the live stream, the transcripts of witness statements, and 2 months of stop data showing the clear pattern in O'Connor's policing history. The demand was direct, $6.5 million and mandatory reforms. When reporters learned about the filing, they called non-stop, one asked. "Why such a high amount?" Darius answered plainly. "Because the Constitution is worth more than apologies." Inside the city's law department, alarm spread quickly. The deputy city attorney reviewing the complaint stared at the evidence with a sense of dread. "We can't lose this," she said at the emergency meeting the next morning. "He's DOJ. He knows the system. He knows how to write this. And he has airtight footage. Several attorneys agreed. One added, if we fight it, we'll lose in trial and lose in the court of public opinion. Another said, if we settle, we need to make it fast and quiet. No one disagreed. They had handled hundreds of lawsuits, but few were this clean, this public, or this dangerous politically. They prepared to negotiate when depositions began. O'Connor sat across from Darius in a conference room, unable to meet his eyes. His attorney tried to guide him through his prepared statements, but the video contradicted every point he attempted to make. When asked why he initiated the stop, he mumbled something about suspicious behavior. Darius asked him to define suspicious. He couldn't. When asked what behavior indicated criminal intent, he hesitated again. Darius pressed harder. Did he run? Did he hide something? Did he reach for a weapon? O'Connor shook his head. No. Darius leaned in. Then what exactly made you escalate? O'Connor finally said the sentence that shifted the room. I felt unsafe seeing a black man in a wealthy area late in the afternoon. His lawyer closed his eyes as if he had watched the case collapse in real time. Darius didn't flinch. Unsafe because of his actions, or unsafe because of his race. O'Connor didn't answer. Silence became the answer. The city attorney leading the defense team called an emergency meeting immediately after the deposition. We are not taking this to trial, she said firmly. This is a disaster waiting to happen. He just admitted to bias on the record, someone else added. The video alone will get a verdict. His confession will double it. They agreed to offer a settlement. Their first number was $3 million, paired with a confidentiality clause and no admission of wrongdoing. Darius rejected it instantly. You don't fix a systemic problem with silence, he said. The city came back a few days later with $5 million, slightly higher but still tied to confidentiality. He rejected it again. My children saw me in cuffs. They deserve truth, not secrecy. Facing intense public pressure and political fallout, the city gave up on trying to contain the story. They returned with an offer closer to what he demanded, $6.5 million, full transparency, public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and mandatory reforms inside CPD. It was the largest individual settlement the city had offered that year, and they knew it. The deputy city attorney tried one last appeal. Counselor Washington, this is our final number. We cannot go higher. You understand the risks of a jury trial? Darius answered calmly. I understand them better than anyone in this room. She nodded and slid the agreement forward. He reviewed it line by line, making sure every commitment was explicit. He signed it only after confirming that the reforms were included. Meanwhile, O'Connor's life continued unraveling. The deposition had shaken him. He had prepared himself to face criticism, but he hadn't prepared himself to hear his own bias spoken out loud. His lawyer told him bluntly, "This settlement is effectively your career ending. You're going to be fired." O'Connor simply nodded. He had known it, but hearing it officially pushed him deeper into the regret he couldn't escape. That night, he sat alone again, staring at the settlement coverage on the news. Reporters repeated his admission over and over. I felt unsafe seeing a black man in a wealthy area. He heard it so many times that it became a loop in his mind, a sentence he couldn't rewind or erase. Darius remained composed throughout the legal process, but internally the case reawakened the fear he had carried since childhood. He began experiencing flashbacks, not violent ones, but quiet, intrusive memories of being 10 years old and watching officers take his father away. A trauma therapist confirmed he was experiencing acute stress response, triggered by the similarity between past and present. He followed a treatment plan, though he didn't always admit to Aisha how difficult it was. He focused instead on the purpose behind the lawsuit. He told her, "This isn't just about me. It's about the pattern." She believed him. She stood by him. She also feared the public attention more than she let on. As the settlement neared final approval, Darius announced that he would allocate $4 million of his after-tax funds to creating the Washington Justice Fund, a nonprofit aimed at helping victims of racial profiling receive legal support and mental health care. When a reporter asked why he chose to give away so much, he said, "Because the value of justice isn't measured by what I keep. It's measured by what I change." His words struck a chord. Donations poured in. Supporters shared stories of their own encounters. The fund grew rapidly. Several CPD officers privately expressed gratitude, saying his push for reform would make the department stronger. Others resented him. Captain Kim, O'Connor's unit commander, told colleagues that Darius had destroyed a good officer's career. Darius heard about the comment through a mutual contact. He didn't respond publicly. Privately, he said, "I didn't destroy anything. Consequences followed actions. That's the law." As the paperwork moved forward, the city scheduled a formal announcement. The press statement contained 3 key elements: acknowledgement of wrongdoing, commitment to policy changes, and confirmation of the $6.5 million payment. It was a moment of accountability, but it was not the end of the story. The reforms needed oversight. The community expected results. And Darius knew the settlement would follow him for the rest of his life, both as a victory and as a reminder of a moment he never asked for. When he closed the file on the case that night, he said quietly to himself, "This part is done. Now the real work begins." And he was right. The legal phase had ended. But the fallout was far from over. The official announcement of the settlement did not end the story for anyone involved, in many ways. It only began the longest and most difficult chapter, and that chapter started with the immediate fallout for Officer Michael O'Connor. Within weeks, CPD notified him that he was being terminated, and the letter cited misconduct, pattern of biased stops, and unlawful detention of a federal employee. O'Connor sat silently in the small conference room where the decision was delivered, hands clasped, staring down as if the words were aimed at someone else. The union representative tried to reassure him that termination wasn't the end of life, but O'Connor barely heard it. He nodded mechanically while feeling the reality break over him. He had lost his badge, his career, and the identity he had built around the uniform. When he walked out of the building for the last time, he didn't speak to anyone. He just drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. That night, he opened a bottle of whiskey and let the hours slip away without direction or purpose. The federal government soon informed him that he would face charges under Title 18, United States Code, Section 242, for violating civil rights under color of law. When his attorney explained the likely outcome, probation, a record, and mandatory counseling, he nodded again, expression flat. "Is there any chance of prison?" he asked quietly. The attorney replied, "Not with your service record and no prior incidents of excessive force." That answer didn't comfort him. He didn't fear prison. He feared the label of being the officer who detained a DOJ attorney without cause and ignited a citywide controversy. He feared being recognized for the worst moment of his professional life instead of the years he believed he had served honorably. The probation hearing came quickly. He pled guilty to a lesser count. The judge sentenced him to 2 years of probation, mandatory therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder, and community service. He accepted the decision without argument, but inside he felt the last piece of his former self slipping away. The loss of his badge affected every part of his life. His wife confronted him one evening after the sentencing. Overwhelmed by the pressure of the public scrutiny and the financial strain of losing his job, she said she couldn't live in a house where she felt like danger followed them everywhere. She packed her bags 2 days later and took their daughter to stay with her parents. O'Connor watched the car leave the driveway with a hollow expression. He didn't chase after them. He didn't ask her to stay. He simply sat on the porch and stared at the ground in the weeks that followed. He applied for several jobs, but every interview ended the same, the moment someone searched his name. The conversation turned cold. Eventually, he settled for a position as a night security guard at a warehouse, a job that paid a fraction of what he once earned and left him alone with his thoughts for long hours. He drank often to quiet the noise in his mind. He avoided mirrors. He avoided people. He avoided anything that reminded him of who he used to be. Months later, during a required therapy session, he finally admitted something that had been circling inside him since the day of the stop. "I felt afraid when I saw him," he said, "not because of anything he did, because of what I thought he represented." The therapist asked him what that meant. He paused before answering. I saw my own fear instead of the person in front of me. It was the closest he came to acknowledging the bias he had denied for so long. That admission marked a turning point. But it came slowly and painfully. On the other side of the city, Darius's life moved in a very different direction. The settlement had brought financial relief. But he didn't treat it as a windfall. He set aside funds for his family's future, paid off long-standing loans, and then directed the bulk of the money toward the Washington Justice Fund. The nonprofit's purpose was clear: provide legal representation, mental health support, and advocacy for individuals who experienced profiling or unlawful stops. He recruited attorneys, social workers, and analysts. He built partnerships with local organizations. He spoke at events about the urgent need for systemic reform. But even while he worked tirelessly, he struggled privately with lingering symptoms of trauma. He avoided walking alone in unfamiliar neighborhoods. He flinched at sudden commands, even from friendly officers. He had trouble trusting authority in moments where trust used to be automatic. His therapist explained that trauma from past and present events had intertwined, and his mind was still sorting through the layered fear. He followed the treatment plan, not because he wanted to, but because he understood his duty to his family and to the people who looked to him for guidance. At home, the emotional fallout continued. His daughter Nia wrote a letter to the mayor, explaining in simple, childlike language why she felt scared of police and asking what adults were doing to protect families like hers. When the letter reached the mayor's staff, they contacted Darius and asked for permission to reply publicly. He declined the public response but appreciated the gesture. He read the letter aloud to Aisha one night, and she cried quietly as he read it. "Our kids shouldn't have to write letters like this," she said. He agreed. He held her hand while she cried and told her that the work he was doing now was for them as much as anyone, despite the forward momentum. Darius struggled with the reality that his own safety still felt fragile. One evening he told his therapist, "I stand in courtrooms and defend the Constitution, but I'm still looking over my shoulder when I walk to my car." The therapist told him that healing wasn't a moment but a process. He nodded, though the process felt slow, several months after the settlement. O'Connor unexpectedly requested a meeting with Darius through the city attorney's office. Darius considered declining but ultimately agreed. Believing closure mattered. They met in a neutral room at the courthouse. O'Connor entered quietly, shoulders slumped, looking far older than his 28 years. He didn't justify. He didn't defend. He simply said, "I'm sorry. I lost control. I saw things that weren't there. I made assumptions that hurt you and your family. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just needed to say it." Darius listened without speaking at first, when he finally answered. His voice was steady but firm. "Sorry isn't enough. Change the system. That's what matters." O'Connor nodded slowly, accepting the truth in the words. After the meeting, Darius walked out of the building feeling a strange mix of heaviness and clarity. He didn't feel victory. He didn't feel satisfaction. He felt the weight of responsibility. His case had become a symbol, but symbols don't fix cities. Work fixes cities. Pressure fixes cities. Accountability fixes cities. And he knew that the fight ahead was far larger than the incident that started it. As winter approached, the city finalized implementation of the reforms tied to the settlement. CPD began real-time body cam audits. Officers were required to complete mandatory bias training before being approved for solo patrol. A new public stop database was launched, allowing residents to track patterns of police encounters in their neighborhoods. It was progress. It wasn't perfection, but it was movement in the right direction. O'Connor took a job volunteering at a Veterans Affairs post-traumatic stress disorder center, hoping to help other veterans confront the ghosts he had ignored. He didn't expect recognition. He didn't expect redemption. He just wanted to do something that wasn't destructive. Darius continued his work, teaching CPD officers about constitutional policing, speaking at conferences, and mentoring young attorneys. But the truth remained. He never walked down a quiet street the same way again. The fallout was wide, the lessons were harsh, and the city was forced to face the cost of one moment of bias that echoed far beyond the sidewalk where it began. 1 year after the settlement, the impact of the case had spread far beyond the headlines, and the story moved into its final phase, what it changed, what it cost, and what still remained unfinished. The Chicago Police Department completed its first full cycle of mandatory bias training, and the results were presented during a public meeting. A deputy superintendent summarized the reform plainly. This began because of a single encounter, he said, and that encounter forced us to confront patterns we could not ignore. He listed the new requirements: 24-hour body cam review for every arrest, mandatory constitutional training before any officer could patrol alone, and the launch of a public stop database that showed stop frequency, demographics, and outcomes. Reporters documented the changes, activists continued to push for more oversight, and city leaders acknowledged that the reforms were not a complete solution, but a necessary step. For Darius, the reforms felt meaningful, but incomplete. He saw progress in the data, but he also saw gaps. Some officers embraced the training, others resented it, and still others pretended to accept it while quietly dismissing its purpose. He spoke at a town hall where a resident asked him if the reforms had solved the problem. He answered honestly, no, but they slowed the damage, and slowing the damage is sometimes the only way to build toward change. His measured tone resonated with some and frustrated others, but he refused to exaggerate victory where none existed. At home, the emotional recovery continued slowly. His son Jamal began opening up again around law enforcement, after months of refusing to walk near a police cruiser. He finally approached a community officer during a school safety presentation. The officer knelt down to talk with him, and Jamal asked, "Are you like the man who took my daddy?" The officer paused, then answered gently, "No, I'm here to protect you." Jamal nodded once and walked back to his teacher. When Darius and Aisha heard about the moment, they reacted differently. Aisha cried quietly. Darius sat still, absorbing the complicated mixture of relief and sadness. He knew trust was not rebuilt in one moment. It was rebuilt through countless small ones. Naya continued writing letters, although now her letters went to local newspapers and youth leadership programs. Her school counselor encouraged her voice, and one of her letters was published in a youth civic engagement newsletter. She wrote, "My dad teaches people about justice. I want to teach them that fairness begins before anything bad happens." Darius read the letter and felt both pride and concern. He worried that his children were forced to grow up faster than he had hoped. He struggled with the idea that his fight for justice had cost them their innocence. At least temporarily. Aisha reminded him one evening, they didn't lose innocence. They gained truth, and truth helps them grow stronger. Her reassurance steadied him. The Washington Justice Fund expanded quickly during its first year. It funded 29 legal cases, provided therapy for dozens of families, and partnered with several organizations to host training sessions on civil rights. The program gained national attention when a major foundation offered a grant to help expand the initiative statewide. Darius accepted on one condition, that the money be used only for direct services, not promotional campaigns. People need lawyers, not slogans, he said. His clarity impressed the board, and the grant moved forward. Meanwhile, O'Connor continued his volunteer work at the Veterans Affairs Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Center. The staff noticed that he worked with a quiet intensity, listening more than he spoke, never presenting himself as an expert. He rarely talked about his past, but when he did, He told other veterans that ignoring trauma only caused deeper harm. One afternoon, during a group session, he shared something he had never said publicly. "I let fear decide for me." And fear turned into judgment, and judgment turned into action that hurt someone who didn't deserve it. A fellow veteran asked him if he thought he could ever move past it. He answered, "I can't change what I did. I can only change what I do next." It wasn't redemption, but it was honesty, months later. O'Connor received a letter from a retired officer who had seen the case unfold. The letter said, "You lost yourself. Maybe now you're finding something better." O'Connor read it several times, unsure how he felt. The letter did not erase his guilt, but it pushed him to stay committed to his volunteer work. He didn't expect forgiveness. He didn't ask for it. He simply tried to make himself useful in a place where people understood the weight he carried. As time passed, Darius returned to CPD headquarters several times to conduct training on lawful stops and constitutional rights. New officers listened carefully. Some asked sincere questions, others sat stiffly, forced into the training they resented, but Darius never reacted emotionally to resistance. He presented the information calmly, clearly, and consistently. After one session, a young recruit approached him quietly and said, "I want to do this job right. Thank you for speaking." Darius nodded. He didn't need to hear gratitude, but he appreciated the gesture. One evening, near the one-year anniversary of the settlement, Darius took his children for a walk through Lincoln Park, the same park where everything had started. They walked together, holding hands. Jamal asked again why the officer had taken him that day. This time, Darius answered differently. "Some people make mistakes because they act on fear instead of facts. My job is to help fix the system that lets those mistakes happen." Jamal seemed satisfied with the answer. Nia added, "And our job is to make sure everyone remembers what happened." Darius smiled softly. "Yes, that's part of it." As they sat on a bench, watching families nearby, Darius looked at his children and felt a quiet conviction settle inside him. He whispered to himself, "We haven't won, but we've started." It was not a declaration of victory. It was a recognition that justice moves slowly, built step by step, case by case, decision by decision. His case had cracked a wall, not demolished it, but cracks matter. They let light through. That night, he reflected on the past year, the fear, the anger, the lawsuits, the reforms, the meetings, the letters, the long nights, the community support, the pain his family endured, the pressure he carried, and the resilience they found together. He knew the fight was larger than him, but he also knew that ordinary people could trigger extraordinary change. The legacy of the incident was not the settlement or the headlines. It was the awakening it created, inside the department, inside the city, inside the communities that had long been ignored, and inside his own household. Hope did not come from the money. Hope came from the shift in awareness, the introduction of accountability, and the insistence that one unjust moment would not be forgotten. It was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a broader movement, and Darius was ready for whatever came next. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it resonated with you, take a moment to subscribe, give the video a like, and share it with someone who cares about justice. Your support helps these stories reach more people who need to hear them.